Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. We're going to talk about memorable marketing and memorization. And one of the things that you have the Guinness World Record. Tell us a little bit about who you are and tell us about that because I'm very curious.
Well, yeah, I love the vibe for this show, Jason. This is it's a lot of fun. So I started off basically as an expert, professional expert, oddly, in the weirdest of ways. I was diagnosed ADHD and dyslexic when I was a kid. This was kind of in the early days of ADHD, so there was a lot of like over medication, a lot of real challenges and problems. It was like a battle between parents and teachers sometimes, like you see today, but over ADD. And so I was, kind of in that ilk, and I was really convinced by a lot of people I would not have any kind of life, career success at all unless I got my head in the game, unless I figured out what was going on with my brain. So I became obsessed with how the brain works, and this was really in the early days of neuroscience, and this was before the theory of brain plasticity was really popular. I remember actually pushing that theory a lot and getting a whole bunch of hate from the establishment. Basically, they were considering it to be established science that the brain is hardwired, and I could go on that forever about how
Mhm.
that led to bad policy and everything. But I was a man on a mission, basically. And to fulfill this mission, to kind of let people know that the brain could change, that it could be adaptable, it could be trained, I wanted to do as much exposure as I could. When I got the Guinness record, I got a ton of publicity for about 2 weeks. And I thought, of course, like a lot of people, the sky was going to open up and money was going to rain. And it didn't happen. So I had to
The
figure out how to
Guinness
market
record for what,
myself.
though?
Oh yeah, sorry. I memorized the order of 59 decks of cards all shuffled together. It's considered one of the toughest memory feats in the Guinness Book of Records. Um, and actually, the top memory experts have tried for years, and I still hold the record to this day. I actually had to break it back once, so I'm a two-time Guinness record holder. You can see the cards actually behind me. 59 decks of cards is 3,068 cards in order, and I was able to recall it with only one mistake.
Are you allowed to go into casinos?
I go into casinos from time to time wearing a hat and glasses. Yes, I do, and
All right,
I like
so
it. I
I'm
like it a
going to
great
book you a
deal.
flight. Me and you are going to Vegas.
It is a whole lot easier to count cards than it is to memorize them too. Like I can show you how to count cards pretty easily. Um, but that's another story. I wrote a little like pamphlet of a book on that one time called Mind Over Luck, and had a lot of fun with that. But my big passion is teaching people how the brain works, and especially how it can be hacked. And my latest book's called Brain Hacker, kind of along the same line. So I was
and
in
and
that.
you run an agency too. Tell
Well,
us a
yeah, and
little bit
that's my
about
that's
the
my main gig now, because I was marketing myself as the memory guy and kind of reaching my arc. I had an infomercial, I had a gig with Sony, things like that. It was great, but then we were reaching just a time where the market was being saturated, and I was looking for another hill to climb. And when you're a speaker, it's a bit of a slog. It's the best paying job, but it's still a job. You still got to go out there every day, and you're only as good as your last gig and stuff. So I wanted to grow something and use what I had known. So in the process, I had gone on thousands of media interviews. I've been on the Today Show. I've been featured in the New York Times on page 6. I've been in like everything you can think of, Entrepreneur Inc., Fast Company, just last year even, and like even to this day. So I was able to get a lot of press. Um, that was partially because I had changed the strategy. I had started pitching the story rather than me as an expert, and that's when everything really changed. So what that means is, instead of saying to this ABC show, "Hey, have the memory guy on, and he can show some cool stuff," that was pretty successful. But then if I say, "Hey, people are losing their memory. Memory is declining right now. You know, or aging population is their number one worry is to go is to lose your memory as you get older, or kids are going back to school after the summertime and they've lost a lot of their knowledge. Have me in to talk to parents about how to improve their brains." So what I essentially use the mantra of like, have a reason to get on the air, and not just the reason of like you're cool.
I
And
like I like the story angle a
yeah.
lot better than I mean that's kind of what Apple well Apple kind of leads now with their numbers, like we have the 8 gigabits or whatever it is, but they used to lead with, create amazing things with this magical device,
Hmm.
rather than, at that time, PCs would be like, hey, check out the megahertz we have on this, and no one ever
Yeah,
cares. And I think, telling the right story, but I do want to get back to the memorization, because I
sure.
think this will help a lot of people listening. Like, I have a horrible memory on some things. I actually have a hard time remembering people's names. So maybe you can help me out better than my cousin helped me out. Now,
I can give you a few tips about that. But I think one of the things that gave me an advantage in the agency, though, is we're not an advertising agency. We can do ads, but we're primarily PR, which means we have to
yeah,
dangle shiny things to get the media interested. Ideally, if we want it to be organic. So that's where the story and the meta trends came in. And now we're to the point where every pitch goes out and we'll tell the media, hey, this pitch is based on the keywords, mental health or, Gen Z. And that's trending right now in the last 3 months. And we'll tell them, why it's trending, because the media is looking for the same number of clicks. It allows us to book our clients so much more than everybody else. Right.
very cool. Very cool. So when we were a lot much younger, I would always forget everyone's names. And I was with my cousin, and he was like, "Man, you're always screwing up my game." And he gave me this helpful hint to remember, girls' names. And he was like, "You just need to do word
There we go.
association." And I
Okay.
said, "Okay, cool. I'll do word association." So this one lady, I can't remember her
I
name.
think I know where this is going. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, and so this it didn't work very well,
Yeah. Okay.
obviously, but this girl told us her name, and I was like, "Oh, word association." I was like, "Oh, wait, I got it. You remind me of a horse. I'll never forget your name." And I don't even remember the name that I forgot that I
Right.
word associated, and obviously that did not go well. So um, how can someone remember things better or train their mind like you did? Because that's pretty incredible that you remembered the order of 59 decks. That's crazy.
Oh, more than that. I mean, my main customers were law students and med students who have to memorize all tons of information and pass their studies. So it's really practical. It's not a parlor trick. You had it really close with the word association, but really, what there's a bit of an instinct that we have when we hear a name. We want to look at the person and think of some, if we're trying a memory technique, we want to look at the person and think of something that reminds us of how they look. The problem is, like, that's a weird instinct that we have. I don't know why we have it, because the thing is, we actually are very good at remembering how people look. There's a bunch of studies. If I were to show you, say, one person's photo, right, or two people's photo, then I could flip 100 photos, and you would immediately pick that one or two, like, oh yeah, that guy. Oh yeah, that. We have incredibly good. It's basically a facial recognition. We can recognize that we saw somebody before. The real challenge is in connecting the name to that person. That's the part that we don't do instinctively, because it's just, it's just not wired in. It's just not natural for us to label something. Our brain, doesn't hasn't evolved to include that in the lexicon. So the trick is actually the most simple trick. I've got a whole course on names and faces, and you can check out my course online and all that. But by far the simplest thing you can try doing is what I call the costume party technique. And it basically is, you take the name and think of, if that name was a costume, what costume would it be? And you imagine them wearing it. So great one for me is Pharaoh, right? That's my last name. And I used to put on like this Egyptian pharaoh hat thing, this really gaudy, partially politically incorrect at looking back stage, when I was like doing, talks on the college circuit and things like that. And nobody forgot my name. Like years later, they'd remember the pharaoh of memory, right? Now we have a bit more of an elegant way to remember it, where I've got the F with the arrow coming out. So it's F and arrow. So it's a bit more of a play on words visual. But that's really what we're trying to do is when you look at something, see if everybody's name was chair, you'd have no trouble remembering their name. You'd be like, you can visualize a chair. The problem is we can't visualize most people's names. Visualize a Dave. What's a Dave? It doesn't have any width or depth or anything. So your brain has no way to store that information unless it's in terms of your senses. So by
So
turning
how are you memorizing Jason? What are you associating me to?
well, and this is where it comes into, I'm using a Blue Jay, but this is where it comes into, after you do this costume party technique over and over and over, you'll start to hear the same names over and over and over. So use the same thing each time. Don't get creative and come up with a brand new one each time. And then you'll be able to change things slightly for different variations. If somebody uses their full name rather than a partial name, something like that, Dave versus David, you can change it slightly to reflect that. You start to come up with your own tricks, but it starts with just the first thing that pops into your head when you hear that person's name. That is a visual and or sensory experience.
Okay, I gotcha. Great. And then what about memorizing other things, like important things? I just find that, especially when, in our mastermind, we'll go over a killer strategy. Like every month, a member goes over a strategy that they're crushing it on. And then we're like, what was the strategy last month? And we can't memorize that. How would you go about making sure that you don't forget anything on that?
Well, that's actually an interesting thing too. It seems, if you think of that sort of situation as having difficulty organizing information rather than difficulty memorizing it, it'll make a lot more sense. So know the information. If I were to mention one of the strategies, you could probably tell me, pages worth of information. So it. It's just that you haven't organized it or connected it to the others in a list, let's say, in an organized way. Simple, basic, everyday example that I use on the air when I'm doing an interview would be, all the vegetables in the grocery store, right? But that doesn't mean you've memorized your grocery list, right? You have to know that in order. And that's the list that serves your purposes. So if you don't think of it like memorizing, if you think of it more like organizing, it starts to make a lot more sense. Organizing information can be fairly simple. There's a whole course, a whole strategy. There's a big rabbit hole you can go down. But one of the simplest things you can do is what's called the room method, where basically, let's take your office, right? Because this is business material. And we'll start in one corner of your office, and you have some object or item that reminds you of that strategy. I don't know, like we'll say email. And I would imagine like a letter that's got electricity all over it and electronic mail. I don't know. That's dumb, but it's the first thing I thought of, right? And that would be
you just
embedded.
Told your age. Like I remember
plus the email. What else?
That's like what I had it on AOL.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. Yeah. I don't know. That's before my time, but if you say so. I just right back at you. But I would just imagine like embedded in the wall so that when you visualize that room again, that item, just because it's weird and stands out, will usually pop up in your head again. And then the next one, I was thinking like email marketing, but like the next one, I don't know, let's see, you get, Facebook ads or something like that. So you could imagine, wallpapering the wall next to it with pictures of people's faces to remind you of Facebook ads, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And you just kind of paint this picture around the room and you build up a knowledge base. And you can build up that knowledge base to be thousands of bits of information. We do it with med students and lawyers and everyone who has to memorize lots of Greek and Latin. And it all comes from just adding one more at a time. And then every once in a while, you'll pause and kind of mentally look around the room to make sure that you didn't make any mistakes or, that you didn't confuse any of the items or something like that. If you want to come up with a better item for it, then you go from there.
I recently got my pilot's license, and that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And it was really hard because now I'm 47, I think 46 or 47. I can't remember. Mm-hmm. I can't remember to the person that's telling me how do you remember how old I am?
That's a great thing to forget. Actually, I'm working on a book now actually called How to Forget. And I know it's funny. It starts off as a joke, but it's actually going to be a really good book about like letting go of trauma and forgiving people and like how to like purge yourself of this. So there's a value in forgetting. Don't and
Yeah.
forgetting your age. Yeah, I'd put that in a chapter. That's a
There
good
you go.
service.
Good. You can quote me on that.
There
But
you go.
when we first started learning how to fly the airplane, and there's so much memorization from the checklists to all the regulations, everything like, and that was really hard because I haven't taken a test in forever, like 20 years. But like what you said about organization. So when I was learning how to fly the plane, we have to do a bunch of maneuvers, slow flight, all this kind of different things. And I was like, God, I cannot memorize what needs to happen until my instructor was like, this is preparing you for landing. So you have to kind of organize this as all the stuff that's coming into landing. Or when we're doing like a power on stall, point the airplane up where it's not really moving and you're almost out of stalling. He's like, that's showing you the takeoff at like too much of pitching up. I was like, okay, I get it. So the
Yeah,
organization is, I
that's
see
really
that.
powerful. Yeah, you actually touched on. I didn't think we'd get into this sort of talking about education and everything in this podcast, but it's you touched on a very important point of learning, that whenever learning is done out of context, it is really difficult for your brain to make any kind of progress, it's so important for kids. My kid is 10 years old, and you try to teach a math fact or a concept out of context of like where you would actually use it. It's so hard to get ahead, and I wish the system knew that better. I wish people had context based or project based learning. Like imagine how quickly you learn when you have a new project, right? Learn anything if you're driven enough. But if the end goal is to build a doom buggy or a robot or something, you got to learn all the stuff to get there. Then people learn 1,000 times more effectively, even without memory techniques and everything, than if they learn all of the science behind that in its respective categories. So organization and also purpose-driven learning, those are some of the two biggest things. If you get those concepts, you can be a super learner. You can learn new skills, like collect skills, like some people collect stamps.
Yeah, my youngest son has the same thing we do, ADHD and dyslexia. I was never diagnosed as a kid, so I was always the unmotivated, dumb kid, and just always hated school. Like literally, I even like still to this day when I go to a school for a conference, I almost like my hands get really
Mhm.
hot and sweaty. Like literally just
Traumatized.
talking about it, my hands are
Yeah.
sweaty. Like it still freaks me out. But my son goes to a dyslexia school, and they do the project based learning, and they have 30 kids tops, and it's unbelievable of like how they teach him, and it's always kind of relating things like, I want you to build this robot out of old CDs and this kind of stuff, and like
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
pretty cool how it works. I was like, man, I wish I had that, but obviously it
And,
worked
and
out.
that's how nature teaches animals, right? That's how we're supposed to learn, right?
Hmm.
Turning it around into the factory model was was never the most effective way to teach somebody. It was the most effective way to create a factory worker in the
Yeah.
industrial revolution. And now with the tech revolution, it's exposing so much of how the education system just and I hesitate to say it's backwards or it's behind the times. No, it was great for what it did, but we live in a different world now, and we're not trying to create factory workers, right?
Yeah. No, let's kind of switch focus. I love the memorization thing, and I want I want to move on
Well,
to
we're going to talk
memorable
about how
marketing.
we put that into pitches too, and how we can
Yeah.
use that. Yep.
Well, yeah, let's talk more about that. Like I get pitched every minute of the day to come on the show, and most pitches I'm like delete. Like they start out really big, right? And I think
Right.
everyone is trying to get in front of someone or get a response from someone. So what can we do in order to get a higher response
Mhm.
rate and to get the responses we want?
Well, that all those pitches actually, I think, prove that email marketing is not dead. It's just changed, by the way.
Mhm.
I still get pitched a lot too, and AI has changed it a lot. So one of the biggest things you want to do, uh, and this is not a neuroscience thing, but it's classic sales thing, is the first thing is to focus on is what they're looking for, not necessarily what the problem is, but what they are looking for. And if you can articulate that the fastest, then you get the biggest response. We did a bunch of campaigns for authors, which is one of our core demographics. And you can do a lot of things about authors. You thought about publicity, a lot of very vanilla stuff. But when we were asking questions about, do you have a book launch plan? Have you made a marketing plan? That was some of the biggest responses because that was the hole in their market. When you're trying to get a higher level client, something like we're trying to get our clients on, entrepreneur.com or something like that, or ABC or something. These people are being pitched all the time. The effort that we try to do is we'll always choose words that help people visualize the experience itself. So we'll always kind of frame it. This is similar to assuming the sale, but really what we're trying to do is to get the producer to picture the client in the studio. And I mean, you can think of like a couple of off the top of my head, I think of like kind of lame examples. We've had some more sophisticated examples, but just, instead of saying, I could show you how to improve your memory, we'll do something like, just for my example, I've had pitches where we've said something like, in your studio, I could take you and transform your memory in front of the camera, right? And that kind of paints more of a picture of
And
like
it
what would
intrigues
happen.
them too.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that we're saying, but there's a principle in the brain that if you visualize something, your brain thinks it actually happened, regardless of other facts. And the best example I have, and a lot of people fight me on this, but think about this. If you've seen any movie, right, where there's a high paid actor or actress like making lots of money and they're playing a character that's poor or middle class, you can still cry, you can still get emotional, you can still buy into the story, you can love the story because you're seeing it. And as long as everything in that scene looks like this person is, living in a trailer park somewhere, struggling to get by, all that stuff, you forget about the other stuff because whatever you see, your brain believes. So if I can get you to see in your mind's eye my client sitting in that couch or writing an article and submitting it, if I can even just talk about that, then it dramatically improves the chances of closing the sale. So some of the things we do also talk about is process. We'll right from day one, we'll start to say, so when we send you an article or, when the client writes the article, what's the usual deadline? How long does it take? Right. And then to answer that question, they have to visualize this client sending them an article and how long it would take to edit it and everything. So we'll have almost like housekeeping questions, but there's a marketing thing behind it because I'm getting you to imagine me or the client or whatever doing the interview or being there. Does that make sense?
It does. I really like that. I mean, you can use this witchcraft for really anything. Like we have. I want to know, how would you make people visualize this? So every year for our mastermind, we rent out 100,000 acre ranch in Colorado,
Cool.
and they come. They all stay at this 100-year-old ranch. We brainstorm in the morning. We ride horses next to 2,000 bison. It's the second largest bison herd outside of Yellowstone, or the biggest outside of Yellowstone. And then the next day, we ride up these great sand dunes that look like, remember, like your Farrow? Never going to forget the
Yeah.
name now. Like riding up these sand dunes. How would you make people visualize that?
Well, I mean, just how you did right now, describing the experience. But what uh, we do know in marketing that questions really solicit more from the brain than
Mhm.
descriptions, though. So asking them if they've ever ridden a horse, if you've ever ridden something, like things like that, will get the brain to work harder, because there's a feeling like even if they don't answer you, their brain has to answer that question in order to move forward. So that's one of the reasons why questions tend to work in marketing really well, uh, even the
I
ones that are
I
overused.
love the question. I always tell people on their homepage, because
Yep,
most
use the
people's
title and ask
marketing,
question.
yeah,
Yeah.
most people's marketing focuses on themselves.
Mhm.
And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, your marketing should be focused on the person coming or seeing it. Like, I do love the question. I always say, like, do you want, or do you, think this? And then they were like, do I? And then they kind of visualize it. And
Mhm.
I love it.
So,
I'm,
if
yeah.
you want to be really, I don't know, sneaky or go to the next level, you could be like, have you ever have you ever pictured yourself on the back of a horse riding up this embankment? Well, hundreds, if not thousands, of your other colleagues are going here, and they're getting more and more successful every day. So it could be part of like a very poetic way to introduce it. But asking that question, have you ever ridden a horse? Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? It gets people to think about it. Like ask somebody if they ever went skydiving, right? You'll get a very strong response. People who have gone skydiving, they're like, oh yeah, I remember it. It was amazing.
Yeah.
People who haven't, they still visualize it, and they have a reaction like, oh no, I could never do that. Like the amygdala has that emotional response.
Yeah.
So questions are really, really powerful, but ask them about questions about their experiences. If I'm going to drill down, I'm giving you all the secrets here, but
I
I
love it.
like your.
Well, I did go skydiving once, and I blacked out, and my vision just went like this. And the guy, because I went tandem, so obviously that's why I'm here. And
Yep.
the guy, I went to the guy, I was like, my vision is going away. Like, it was tunnel vision. And then it was after the shoot.
Sounds like a
And
panic attack or something, right?
I loved it. I mean, I thought it was awesome. And then he goes, well, maybe the straps are too tight. I can loosen them. I'm like, no, 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 no. That's good. Like, just tell me
Tight
when to
straps.
lift my legs before we hit the ground. So
Yeah,
I do
the
like,
brain is
yeah.
it's a beautiful mystery, man. And it was described by one neuroscientist. I love the description. Was that we have studied the brain for eons, right? We've always been fascinated by how it works. And the neuroscientist who was one of the tops, I think he was a Nobel laureate, he said, we've barely scratched the surface. We are like a drunken man fumbling in their pocket for loose change under a dimly lit street lamp, and your brain is the city. Like we have discovered so little compared to what is going on, and we understand so little compared to what is actually going on in the brain. And we arrogantly think that we're in charge, and so many times our brain is in charge, like that eye, losing your sight thing. So many times your brain just takes over.
Hmm. Have you seen the movie Lucy?
Yeah, that was brilliant.
What?
It's
And
based on
where,
a
like,
false brain premise. It does bug me though.
yeah, well, I just thought that was kind of cool. I was like, man, I
Yeah.
was like, we're pretty dumb. Like, how much of a brain do we actually use? Is it
Well,
10%,
but that's
2%?
that's a false. Okay, so I gotta say this, because there's gonna be somebody who has some neuroscience background in the comments that'll kill me if I don't. It's based on a false assumption in science. So we've often heard that we only use 5% of our brain, or 10%, depending on whatever you do.
Yep.
That is on purpose. Okay, we only use 10% of our brain. Let's say it's 10 at a given time. It does fluctuate up and down. The reason we don't use all of our brain is because if all of your brain is activating at the same time, that's a seizure. Okay. That's not you being a genius and taking a limitless pill. You're only supposed to use like 10% at a time. It's like accessing different things. If you're
You're
accessing
overloading
every
it.
memory simultaneously, you're going crazy. You're not like lifting objects with your mind. So
That's
that's
pretty
something that
funny.
really bugged
I
me
like that.
about that. Um,
La- Last
but
question I
but
have
I
for
do
you.
but I would agree that
Oh,
we're only using a fraction of our brain's potential. If we phrase it that way, that would satisfy the neuroscientists out there that are going to nitpick on that.
I like that. Last question I have for you. Is there any exercise in the morning that you do for your memorization or your brain?
Um, Well, yeah, I actually I was a Buddhist for 8 years, and I don't consider myself a Buddhist anymore, but I still practice. So I actually have these things right here, beads, and I'll go through my visualizations and I'll move one bead forward, and I'll go through visualization, whether you call it manifestation or visualizing or seeing what I want throughout the day, and it'll just be kind of reinforcing and focusing me on the task at hand, what I want to accomplish. So, I picture whatever I want to get done. I picture it already done. And that is kind of a, kind of one of those woo woo, like secret
Uh-huh.
type, self-helpy things. I'm not actually suggesting it for its manifestation capabilities. I think that there might be a thing to manifesting, but there's a very real brain thing that we know is going on. So if I tell myself, if I say, hey, I want to run a business, I want to start my own business, right? Then you're starting from scratch, and what you're visualizing is this journey ahead. It's very daunting, it's very difficult, right? But if I can get you to picture yourself having already succeeded at that business, painted, it's already there, it's already done, your brain starts to figure out, how do I get there? And it asks self questions, it comes up with answers that you would never have thought of because of a change in perspective. So I think manifestation, I won't say I'll close the book on any sort of spiritual side of it, but I think the majority of it is that change of perspective makes your brain think differently. If I think of what sales I want to accomplish and what clients I want to get, all of a sudden my brain thinks of, well, I haven't posted here, I haven't done that, or maybe I could reach out to
Mm.
the CFO and do this. And like I would never have gotten those ideas if I didn't change my perspective with that end in mind. So I start with that, and everything else seems to fall into place. I exercise. I say good things. I have bonuses for my
Mhm.
staff. I'm happy. Other things. If you can keep that end in mind and do that morning ritual, yeah,
Awesome.
works.
Uh, what's the name of the book so people can check it out?
Brain hacker.
Brain Hacker. Awesome. Well, everyone go check out Brain Hacker. I love that name. I can't forget that one. That's pretty cool. And if you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure you like, subscribe, and yeah, until next time, have a swank day. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you want more content like this, make sure you click on the link on the screen or check out your most popular podcast platform where the full episode is there. And until next time, have a swank day. What are you doing? Go check it out. Click on the link. I'll see you soon.